Hey guys, so I'm going to be reading The Boy Who Saved Baseball. This is one of our class novels, and so if you have a copy of it, you can follow along, but if not, just sit back and listen and see if you can kind of visualize the pictures that you're making in your brain while you're reading. Before we start, the very beginning of this book actually includes a map. Obviously, if you do not have a copy of the book, you're not going to have this to reference. I may occasionally reference this when I'm reading it aloud, but just to give you an idea, this is what the town that you're going to find out more about today looks like, and I'll reference it a little bit later. The Big Inning. People down in Dillontown don't agree on much. Not the skateboard laws, not the billboard laws, the economy, the ecology. That's when they don't even agree on which way the wind is blowing. But they do agree on this. From the old-timers in their overalls on Main Street to the 77 keyboard-clicking kids down at Scrub Oak Community School, they'll each and all tell you, if there was ever a boy named Cruz de la Cruz, somebody would have come along and invented him. And no matter how weird and wild and tall the tale, no one, not even Black Jack Buck himself, could have cooped up a mind-whacking brain snapper as wild and bulbaceous as what really happened. Why? Because Cruz de la Cruz, that cybervado desperado, not only saved El Civismo, the very spirit of this town, he saved the holy game of baseball as we know it. Tom Gallagher sensed the ghostly calm even before he had opened his eyes. In a hill town known for its harsh and wild winds, the morning broke without even the whisper of a breeze. Tom had hoped today would be as ordinary as possible. He'd woken early, dressed, and finished off a plate of his mother's chorizo con huevos, as he usually did on a Sunday morning. Then he'd walked outdoors to pay his friendly old neighbor, Doc Altenheimer, a friendly old visit, as he usually did on Sundays. He'd stopped to pick up the paper at the foot of Doc's long driveway as usual. But today, Tom was planning to do something unusual. "Hey, Doc," he called out as he hustled toward the huge white house. "Padres are in third." "Well, what do you know?" Doc called back. "There's hope yet, isn't there?" The 87-year-old apple rancher sat at a yellow kitchen table smack dab in the middle of his long front porch. He leaned out and slid a chair over on the wooden deck boards. "Come have a seat, Tom." Doc talked like he moved, slow and easy. "Good to see a friendly face. My gosh, with that town hall meeting coming up tonight, everybody and their brother's been by here lately, trying to sell me on one fool plan or another." Doc's words hit Tom two ways. First, he felt instantly guilty, since he was here to do the exact same thing. Tom wanted to make sure, once and for all, that Doc understood this whole land development scheme some people were pushing for was a bad idea. Then he felt double nervous. Tom had spent all week working on a little speech. Never in his 12.5 years had he done anything like that before, to write out a speech ahead of time in order just to remember what he was going to say when the time came. Should be easy, right? All he had to do was step up and deliver his pitch, just the way he had practiced it. Well, not so easy for Tom Gallagher. Even though his father was a teacher who spoke to crowds, and his mom was a librarian who read to crowds, Tom was far more comfortable keeping his thoughts to himself, even with his friends. "Yesterday," said Doc, "the mayor stopped by for about the 100th time. Him and the new banker fellow from Texas who's been buying up all the land." Doc opened up the sports pages with soft, tremouring hands. He spread out the baseball section so Tom could read in the scores. "Funny, ain't it, son? Now that it's all come down to me, it looks like I took over being the most popular and the least popular man in the town at the same time." Tom puffed out a small laugh. He'd heard that phrase lots of times in these hills, but never in regards to Doc. There was a shadowy former baseball pro player called Dante Delgado. He was a one-time hometown hero who officially wore that title. Nowadays, the man was practically a hermit, living on top of Rattlesnake Ridge. After the mayor left, Doc continued, the Historical Society came calling. Daisy Ramirez and that bunch of busybodies tried to tell me that this old broken-down baseball field was a historical monument, ought to be preserved. Well, I told him it's history, all right. Soon as I sell the land, it'll be history." Doc laughed. They didn't appreciate that. Sell the land? Wait a minute. Just yesterday, Tom had reassured the other baseball players, saying, "Trust me on this, guys. Doc won't sell. He's a baseball man. He loves these hills. He used to walk up this ridge, spot the perfect big leaf maple tree, trim off a branch, and make his own bat from it. He's on our side." Now, Tom wondered how he could have been so wrong. You mean, I'm leaning that way, son," said Doc. "The trouble is, I've gone round and round on this deal so many times, I feel like a windmill in a rainstorm." He took out his handkerchief, held it to his mouth, and coughed. "But tonight's the big night, isn't it? Gotta let everybody know." Now, Tom thought, now's the time. Tell him now. Don't wait another second. Tom scooted his chair closer. He gripped the seat bottom, then he scooted back. He closed one eye and tried to focus on his mission. Then he closed the other. He saw the words, but he couldn't make himself speak. "I ain't a fool, Tom. Sure, it means more traffic and noise and bulldozers kicking up dust all over the year, or all year long. But all in all, I think it'll be good for us. The place is dying, son, and as far as I can see, there's only one way to pump life and spirit back into Dillontown. Open up the highway, build new roads and new homes, and bring in more jobs. Those builders did nice enough work here down the hill. I expect they'll do the same up here." He tucked away his handkerchief. "Wouldn't be selling my land if I didn't. Jumping jackrabbits. What do I need with $6 million? A man my age." That nearly knocked Tom off his chair backwards. $6 million? Wow, that's a lot of money. "Well, Doc," he thought, you could give me the money. I wouldn't be mad." Tom had never considered the idea that a man might reach a point in his life where even $1 million wasn't important to him. And Tom had seen the new ballpark down in Lakeview Mesa, the shiny chain-link fences and the store-bought grass, all neat and trim. He'd seen the new baseball camp whose summer team had been an annual challenge game against the Dillontown camp 3 years ago. Some challenge. Each year they'd beaten Tom and Dillontown Wildcats by at least 10 runs. Maybe brand new and improved was better. For the next half hour, Tom pored over the sports page with Doc, their usual ritual. He'd call out each game result and the box score highlights, and each time Doc had something wise and thoughtful to contribute. "Don't count them Pirates out of it just yet. Those young players have got more heart and hunger than all of those overpaid millionaires combined." Tom nodded. But in his brain, all he could do was yell at himself. Why didn't I talk to him sooner? Why did I keep putting it off, and why can't I tell him now that I think we're losing the greatest ballpark in the world, with 100 years of baseball swirling in its walls and a right-hand batter's box that holds the very same dirt that Dante Delgado once dug into and spat on in his way to the world record books. Slowly, Tom found the next score, the Yankees game, and was about to read it out loud when Doc spoke up again. I've been here all my life. My wife and son, God hold 'em close, lived and died right here. Even in hard times, this town's been really good to me." He set his elbows on the table and laced his fingers through. "I just hope to return the favor, that's all." Tom sat back and stared off into the distance. From Doc's front porch, he could see the spires and crosses of several churches rising across the scattered rooftops of the town below. He could see the shops on Main and Mercado, the little adobe post office and town hall, and La Plaza de Oro, where a cluster of old ladies in white scarves stood feeding the birds before making their way to Mass. Closer, near the apple groves and farmlands, he could see the ancient baseball field, Lucky Strike Park, built on a dry lake bed 100 years ago by Doc's father, and a gang of crusty gold miners, including Mr. Long John Dillon himself, the founder of the town. Doc still owned Lucky Strike Park, but more importantly, he owned about 320 acres of prime real estate, which was key to the whole deal. Doc's land was where the golf course would go, where the best homes were going to be built, and now where the new lake was going to be planned. It was going to be a lake that would drown the town's baseball field under 15 feet of water. Doc coughed again, wiped his mouth, while his eyes seemed fixed on empty air about halfway to the orange trees on the edge of his front lawn. For 55 years, I've delivered just about every baby born in this town, Tom, including you. So I figure I could deliver the town this one gift. A new park and a chance for new life. Tom's stomach wrenched tighter. He lowered his head. No sense now saying anything. Doc had made up his decision, and he'd made peace with it. Ever since the early 1900s, the Altenheimer family had leased the Lucky Strike Park to the townspeople for $1 a year. This summer, that 100-year lease was up. And over 100 years, Dillontown had shrunk from 5,000 people to 559, give or take. Meanwhile, to the west, an ocean of red-tiled rooftops, houses and malls had crept up along the land, coming closer and closer like a pool of blood oozing up out of the earth itself. Once those builders put in a spanking new field, Tom, it'll be a whole lot better for your team, don't you think? Better facilities, better equipment. My gosh, look what it did for those boys down the hill. For some reason, hearing that fired up a spark in Tom. At the same moment, a breeze began to stir. Those guys aren't so great, he said. Just 'cause they got a fancy park with batting cages and everything doesn't make them great ball players. Our field's just as good. We really like our field. The east wind gusted up and rustled the paper on the table. Tom slammed his arm down to catch it, and then something that surprised him as much as it seemed to startle Doc. Shoot! We could stomp those guys like a bush on fire any day of the week. Doc pulled back and smiled. Well, you haven't done it yet. Tom folded his arms. Well, still, we could beat 'em if we really wanted to. You know, like the Pittsburgh Pirates. Like you said, we got heart and hunger. We do. Those other games, they never meant anything, that's all. Doc sat a moment longer. I like your spirit, Thomas. Your age. I was the same way. He took a black pen from his pocket. On the sports page margin, he began to write. Doc often left Tom with a few words to ponder. Words of encouragement, he called them. This time he wrote, Even in the dead of night, the sun is always shining. He replaced the pen. Nice to hear you speak up, though. But the plain fact is, times have changed. I'm sorry, Tom. It's just too late. As Doc had promised that night, in front of 500 people sitting on 500 rickety metal folding chairs, with another few dozen crowded along the edges of the rickety-crickety town hall, he let the whole world know what he decided to do. Tom sat in the far back row with Frankie Flores, his best friend, alongside Ramon Sabala and a few other kids who had signed up for the 12 and under baseball Wildcat camp. Sitting nearby were Tom's parents along with Rachel Gleason, the quietest girl in school, and her little sister Tara, who was not so little, but as she put it, big-boned. Next to them sat Frankie's loudmouth cousin Maria. They all strained to see the colored graphics the builder flashed on the screen, showing the fancy ranch houses with mountain views, a golf course with slick greens and white sand traps, and a combo sports field. Next came the shots of families playing soccer, golfers hitting golf balls, and little baby ducks floating on a blue lake. It was a fancy professional show, and Tom could tell people were impressed. Finally, the lights came on and Doc stood up and walked to the podium, and it seemed like the whole room had sucked a big breath all at once. As I've said all along, Doc began, I only want what's best for this town. I'm sick of all the feuding and the brouhahas. Too old for that. But I'm also too old to look after my land. While he spoke, Doc tipped back his white silk cowboy hat and took in the whole crowd with his silvery blue eyes. These men from Orange County came down here and made me a decent offer. They'll widen the road, put in some nice homes, throw up a new park for the kids. From the get-go, it all sounded good to me. Doc glanced at a cluster of big landowners sitting right up front, including Ray Pruitt, a cattle rancher, Alabaster Jones, the bank president, and Mayor Oscar Calabasa. They all owned big spreads near Doc's land, and they all knew that if Doc's property got developed, their value of their land was going to go sky high. They wanted this decision. But earlier this morning, Doc continued, a fine young ball player came to visit me, and he had a few things to say that put a hitch in my hat. Tom's heart thumped against his chest, bones like a bad hot grounder. He sank really low into his seat. Doc wetted his lips. Now, I ain't much of a churchgoer, you folks know that. But here's what I do believe. Dillontown is a baseball town. That makes whatever we do here a baseball decision. And since I also believe that baseball is God's game, then I'll put the fate of this town in his hands. The whole crowd rumbled, swiveled. They all turned to ask their neighbors if they'd heard that right. Had they heard what this old man said? Doc raised a hand. Now, hold on. Don't jump ahead out just yet of me. These fine young gentlemen stood here and told us how beneficial their housing project has been for those families down the hill. How much more advantage and opportunity their children have than our kids do up here. And I felt the same way. But what young Tom Gallagher said today set me to wondering. Is it new facilities that would help this town the most, or a new spirit? His eyes roamed around the room. So here's what I've decided to do. Tom sank even lower. Everyone twisted and turned to look at him. Doc's voice rose up loud and strong. I hereby propose a good old-fashioned baseball game to settle the matter. A team from that new summer camp down the road versus a team from our camp right here in town. Just like they've done the past few years. Only this time it's really gonna mean something. One big game, do or die. If our team wins, I pull out of this deal and the town stays the way it is. If they lose, bring on the bulldozers. He touched the brim of his hat. Thank you kindly. He stepped away from the podium. No one said a word. His boot clicks filled the hall. Tom was crouched on the floor. Maria Flores, tall and lean, towered above, one hand on her hip. You said he was on our side, she hissed. Then what are you going to talk to him for us? What'd you say? I don't know, Tom squeaked out. I didn't say anything. I don't get it, said Rachel. Us? Mr. Gallagher? Does he mean us? Tom's dad, the camp coach, had a look on his face that said it all. His mouth hung open like a sand trap. His eyes were as big as golf balls. That's not fair, said Tara. We'll never win. And when we lose, everybody's going to hate us and blame us for the rest of our lives. Frankie leaned over and swatted Tom's shoulder. Kind of like the idea. I bet every girl in town will be at the game. Ramon shook his head. You'd say that about a funeral, you dog. Tom buried his head in his hands. You guys, he said. It will be a funeral. Ours. And that was precisely the feeling Tom Gallagher woke up with the next morning, as if he were going to a funeral.